It's time for Healing Utah, a program dedicated to helping Utahns heal from addictions to drugs, alcohol, pornography, and other addictions. Your host is Abby Bonnell, along with the co-founder and CEO of Utah Addiction Centers, Jeremy Boberg.
Jeremy, great to have you back on the program again. You're treating all kinds of addictions, but on this specific show right now, we want to take a closer look at substance abuse, a plague on society. It crosses genders, ethnic backgrounds, religions, educational and income levels, and age brackets too. It's everywhere.
It does. Thanks for having me back on, Abby. As far as the everywhere, I wanted to look at some specific statistics that we don't look at. I want to talk about statistics more specifically around the different types of drugs, and I want to start with something more small or what is less known or thought of as being less of a problem, and that would be tobacco. Right now, we have statistics or current research that shows that tobacco, just the healthcare cost, is $130 million a year. That's to treat healthcare-related problems related to tobacco. We don't really talk about that much. We talk more about the illicit drugs. Well, let's talk about the illicit drugs. It's only 11 million. Huge discrepancy between 11 million and 130 million. But we play as if the tobacco is not a problem. Alcohol itself is a 25 million years. That's just $25 million a year. And that's just healthcare costs. That doesn't include criminal behavior. It doesn't include job loss or work-related problems. It doesn't include insurance-related car accidents. So these are just healthcare costs.
And something you always point out, Jeremy, is cross-addictions. I mean, you can have this one addiction, but it moves into another field. You're not just dealing with one, and that's where the Utah Addiction Centers treats a whole spectrum of addictions.
Absolutely, and it's very common that you see this. The alcoholic or a person who consumes the alcohol usually has a cigarette real close by. The cigarette is the stimulant, and the alcohol is the sedative. And so we're constantly one attributing factor to somebody who really is considered an addict is we're balancing the equilibrium of neurochemicals in the brain, stimulating neurochemicals versus sedating neurochemicals, and we're constantly trying to balance the two. As we talked last week, pornography is a stimulant drug. Alcohol would be a sedating drug. Tobacco would be a sedating drug. Cocaine would be a stimulating drug. And you'll find that people will use both a stimulant and a sedative chemical or a behavior that's sedating. And they're constantly looking for that equilibrium, a balance, trying to balance those neurochemicals in the brain.
So let's also look at the other big elephant in the room, opioids, pain medications. I mean, more than a decade ago, I don't think doctors were totally aware of really this bullet that they were giving people. And it's exploded into such awful addictions that's moved on because, pain pills are expensive. And within 30 days, I mean, some doctors will say, you're hooked because of the opioid derivative within the pain pill. And then that leads into other gateway drugs.
And you're right. The sad part is a decade ago, and until just recently, in fact, we're still seeing it in some colleges and universities. Many physicians don't have training on the disease of addiction. They'll have maybe 4 hours worth of training out of their full tenure of school, and only 4 hours of training. They're not taught really what's going on, and I think that's a very problematic. And we've noticed that over the last, especially here in Utah, where over 20 years we've been in the top 4 of opioid abuse and prescription abuse problems. And we've done an impeccable job teaching, and our physicians out there are doing a much better job looking at this and trying to make some changes in legislative as well as in just their own personal practice. But the truth be known, people don't need to be on opioids long term. The brain has ways of being able to minimize or mitigate the pain. It continues to be problematic as we continue to feed it and give it attention. And so there's a great article, a research article by Dr. Jay Bishop, that I've talked about before that he's out of the Intermountain Healthcare, and he's done long-term trends on opioid use and prescribing appropriate behaviors, and he says he doesn't use it for more than 3 days, and then he takes his post-operative patients and puts them on ibuprofen after that, and with a 96% success rate.
The trouble is that so many people have not done that, and they have become addicted and drug abuse and drug dependence, and then suddenly it's tearing their lives apart. They're not functioning. They can't hold down a job. Their families are just in crisis. And that's where you see cases turn up at the Utah Addiction Center. I'd just like to point out right now that Jeremy is a clinical therapist, experienced one. You are offering free consultations right now at your center. You deal with this. You have trained staff that deal one-on-one, and every case is different. Everybody walks in with a different story.
They do. Everybody's got a different story, but there's similarities in patterns, and that's what we're looking for. We're looking at the patterns. We're not looking for, specifically what it is that you're using to self-medicate. That's a symptom. The fact that I'm an alcoholic, the alcoholic piece is a symptom. A drug addict, all you're doing that's a symptom. We're looking for the underlying issues: the depression, the anxiety, the low self-esteem, the post-traumatic stress. Those are the root causes. If I had a cancer patient, I'm not going to be if I were a physician, I'm not going to have that cancer patient just be treating the symptoms of the cancer. Nor would I do that with a diabetic. I'm going to treat the underlying causes of what is causing the cancer. We're going to treat the cancer itself. We're going to treat the diabetes itself.
And that's why you involve the entire family who's surrounding that person.
That's why it's a holistic approach. We include the family. We include the deep trauma work. My therapists do EMDR. It's an acronym for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. They focus on the trauma. They mitigate the trauma, make it go away. If we can tease out what it is we're self-medicating and make it go away, what are you going to self-medicate?
And, I think a lot of people get confused when they say, well, I'm self-medicating. Well, what are you self-medicating with? And I think you've really kind of answered that. It can be anything from a legal drug or substance like alcohol to something that is illegal like marijuana.
Right. And then not only the chemicals, but there's also a lot of behaviors that are involved in that. We self-medicate with eating disorders, with sexual addictions, as we discussed last week, with media, tuning out and watching mind-numbing TV. There's a lot of different ways to self-medicate. Here in Utah, going back to the chemicals, we're seeing, I think Utah is one of the best states when it comes to opening our eyes to the substance abuse problems. With a predominant LDS culture, oftentimes you have people who aren't going into the alcohol. But my doctors prescribed me this medication, so it's okay. And the reality is they begin abusing it. And I've had countless people who have become addicted to opioids because their doctor prescribed it.
How do you keep up with all of the trends? I mean, we recently had the tragic case up in Summit County, and this isn't an isolated case. There's 2 or 3 other cases within the state of Utah where a very potent synthetic opioid from China, Shanghai, was shipped in the mail to teenage kids in Summit County and 2 13-year-old boys, and the toxicology results are still pending on that, but it's believed, all signs point to the fact that they inhaled a new opioid called Pink, or Pinky for short, and it's deadly.
It is. Pink is it's a synthetic opioid that is causing a lot of damage. It's very dangerous. It is new to us. A few years ago it was bath salts. There are scientists, chemists that are coming up with new novel ways to get drug products out there. These are definitely mob and mafia-driven chemicals, and they're trying to find new ways to legally get a product out there. This is a new one. Again, I'm going to take you back to the number one leading cause of death out of all chemical intoxicants out there, out of all the drugs from sugar and caffeine all the way up to cocaine and pink. The number one leading cause of death, the most dangerous drug that we know of, is tobacco. We have more tobacco-related deaths each year, 440,000 a year. and we need to talk about the full gamut. Pink is dangerous, but we've got to talk about the full gamut of what's really going on and how dangerous it is and what's happening.
You know, if you have a loved one who's struggling right now, Jeremy Aboba, co-founder, CEO, and clinical therapist at Utah Addictions Center based in Eagle Mountain, is providing free consultations. You can call them on the hotline 801-766-2233. Also, for more information, check out healingutah.com. We'll be back with more in just one moment.
Welcome back to Healing Utah on Utah's Talk Radio 105.9 KNRS. Listen and you'll know.
Always great to be chatting with Jeremy Boberg, co-founder, CEO, and clinical therapist at the Utah Addiction Centers. Located in Eagle Mountain, you always have such a wealth of experience in the field of addictions, and we've been focusing on substance abuse. This is something you deal with day in, day out from all walks of life, Jeremy.
Yes, we do, and I appreciate the opportunity to help the listeners understand not only what's going on out there, but also find ways to seek help and kind of what comes next.
And what can somebody expect, really? Because, if you're going through all of these challenges, or if you're a loved one listening right now thinking, oh gosh, that's me. I'm watching this happening under my own roof, or my own friend at work, or another relative in another home. What should they do? I know you're offering free consultations at the Utah Addiction Centers, but what can somebody expect when they come in to meet with you?
Well, let's even back it up before that. Let's talk about how do we approach a loved one, or how do we connect and get on the same page. We've got a gut feeling, or we know that there's a problem. The person we're trying to confront is in denial, or is kind of more arrogant about it, not willing to listen. At that point, you really have two options. And as an interventionist, I've been doing interventions for over a decade, and as an interventionist, my first priority is invite them, and no guilt, no shame, no demeaning. Go to the person, say, "I love you. I know this, and this is going on." I know of a facility that I've heard Jeremy talk about a free consultation. Would you be willing to, if I gave him a call, would you be willing to come with me and see what we can do to get help?
And when we're talking about help, you're helping all kinds of addictions.
Absolutely, all types, and from chemical intoxicants to behavioral addictions, emotional problems, we do it all. Once the person then, 8 out of 10 people, when given that invite, will say yes. For those 2 who don't, great, call us and we'll start an intervention process and move forward from there. Once we get the person to be willing to do an assessment, whether it's through an intervention or just through a loving invite, once we get them to the doors and do an assessment, we're going to talk to them. These people have enough shame and guilt. They don't need a therapist or a counselor to add to it. We're not there to demean them. We're not there to shame them. We understand the disease. We understand what's going on from both their perspective as well as the family. So we're going to validate them. We're going to teach them. We're going to give them the education, the information they need to know to make appropriate decisions. Some people come in and they can do this work on an outpatient basis. That's preferred. Other people have tried outpatient unsuccessfully several times. That's when you need to go to higher levels of care, to residential treatment. And so we're going to help them identify what the appropriate level of care is and how to go about that with financing it, whether it's through insurance, self-pay, or third-party alternatives.
And you have great success rates.
We do. And the reason we're so successful is, one is we actually do care. We're non-shaming, we're non-demeaning. But on top of that, we're doing it from a holistic approach. Again, we look at the disease of addiction, the chemicals that they're ingesting or the behaviors, as a symptom. We're not just treating the symptom. You can treat the symptoms with 12-step meetings, with education, with sponsors and social support. You can treat the symptoms. But if you don't treat the underlying causes of what they're self-medicating, they're going to continue to relapse. habitually over and over and over again.
And that's why you involved everybody around them that's who is involved in their lives.
We do. So from the holistic approach, we're going to involve the family and loved ones, spirituality, ecclesiastical leaders if appropriate, again, the friends. We're going to invite group support, 12-step meetings, a sponsor. We want them to be able to find an appropriate way or means of feeling accepted and normalizing what's going on. I didn't say accepting or making it acceptable. I'm just saying it's okay to talk about it and be able to be honest, because the number one problem with the disease of addiction is dishonesty. We're self-medicating secrets because we're not for whatever reason we can't deal with that secret ourselves, so we're going to self-medicate it.
So you're giving hope, really, a sober, a self-fulfilling, a productive life that could be lying ahead here. But they really do have to do the first thing and get that free consultation. And it is free at Utah Addiction Center. That hotline number is 801-766-2233. You must have witnessed some pretty remarkable turnarounds.
We've seen, to say I see miracles take place in my office every day, is the greatest honor. I've got the best career in the world. Watching people change, it's hard as well because not everybody wants to change. Not everybody is ready to change, and the client, the family member, the loved one, they have a right to fail, and we'll do our best to help them through this. And those who actually succeed, there's no better gift, no better paycheck than a year, 5 years, 10 years down the road. And receiving a thank you. I'm still clean. I'm still sober. I'm still in recovery. Just saying it gives me the goosebumps. That is the greatest value of the work we're doing, because the value of that and what's taken place over those years and months for those individuals, who they've helped, what they've done, and it's just perpetually paid forward.
Okay, and again, if somebody is just joining us, Jeremy is here. Jeremy Boberg, co-founder, CEO, and clinical therapist with Utah Addictions Center. And here's the great thing. You treat so many different addictions. If somebody's just joining us, it's not just substance abuse, it's eating disorders, it's all kinds of mental illnesses, too, that lead to addictions.
We do. We've designed the Utah Addiction Centers as both mental health treatment as well as addictions. Compulsive behaviors, whether that's a compulsive attachment, codependency, to rageaholics, self-loathers, to pornography addictions, eating disorders, social media addicts, and yes, they're prevalent right now, as well as the chemical intoxicants. I want to remind the listeners, we self-medicate between the four groups of addictions, and we're going to continue to do so until we get help.
Okay.
You can't stop this on your own.
What a pleasure to have you on board here today, Jeremy. Jeremy Boberg, co-founder, CEO, clinical therapist over at Utah Addiction Centers based in Eagle Mountain. Check it out for yourself at healingutah.com. You can give their hotline a call to 801-766-2233. And don't forget, there is a free consultation if you told them or tell Jeremy and his team that you heard it here. Utah Addiction Centers. Thank you so much, Jeremy, for joining me.
Thank you, Abby.
You've been listening to Healing Utah, sponsored by the Utah Addiction Center. Join us again next week at this time for a new conversation about the challenges of addictions on Utah's Talk Radio 105.9 KNRS.